selected a number of works that reflect 30 years of Mark's practice. So the earliest works date from the 90s, and the most recent work is from 2018. So we wanted to represent different stages of his practice and to encompass the different kinds of installations that he's been making over this period.
This exhibition represents a journey. We'll be going through different kinds of immersive environments, and each one also suggests a character. We've called it Theatre of the Natural World because there are protagonists that these environments suggest.
The Library for the Birds is a series of walk-in experiential aviaries that I've done, and I've done a number of them for different cities. They all have very different characters related to those cities. Obviously the trees are very different. In this case we're using the apple tree, which of course is another reference to the tree of knowledge, the tree of forbidden fruit, the tree of life also. That is the emblem of the Whitechapel Gallery itself. So, always our trees of knowledge are very problematic. You know, perhaps they are beginning to show the signs of root rot in some cases, and we see like libraries which have branches, you have divisions of knowledge represented within the gathering of books, whether that's ornithology or philosophy or agriculture, travel and adventure, all of these things which of course birds really need to know about if they're going to make it into the future. We have an incredible imbalance in our relationship to birds. What we do affects them dramatically. What they do hardly affects us at all in some ways. So in the most sort of arrogant anthropomorphic projection, we imagine that our knowledge would somehow benefit them, and perhaps not surprisingly, they seem entirely indifferent to what we've made available to them.
There's a kind of paradox here as well, which is that we've got this beautiful sanctuary for living things. It's full of light and air and nourishment and so forth. But it's within the broader landscape of these structures, and these are called hunting blinds.
Right, or hides, yeah. So these are structures that hunters have to make themselves invisible, right? To disguise their presence, their scent, their silhouette, so that they can observe animals and of course kill animals. So I've done a series of these hunting blinds, and each hunting blind represents different attitudes, motivations, methodologies of hunters. This blind is called the Glutton. So this is for the hunter who hunts for their stomach, right? Who is the culinary hunter, who also, with that culture of culinary hunting, also comes the material culture of setting a hunter's table. So you have within that the cutlery that are designed of bone and horn, and the visual motifs of the plates and the glasses. You have rather decadent-looking sausages and all of the elements of that the hunter surrounds themselves with to enjoy their kill, to consume their kill. We have another blind here is the dandy rococo, a nod to the aristocratic hunting, to the idea that in some cultures hunting is a privilege related to land use, and that it's almost done out of cultural habit rather than necessity.
despite the fact that there is a kind of weird antipathy towards hunting, because it looks very brutal, it's quite a violent act, and yet there's an intimacy and a kind of integration within the natural environment, which is entirely lacking from the industrialised slaughter of animals for meat production. And I think that that's also part of this installation, that is recognising that because they're camouflaged, they actually do have a sense of respect for the natural environment. They're integral to it or immersed within it.
One of the aspects of hunting, like any consideration of nature, is that it is attitudes toward it are very socially constructed, socially bound. So when we show the hunting blinds in rural Austria, we have a very different response from, say, showing it in urban Italy, for instance. In urban Italy, animal rights people threatened to come and throw blood on me and to protest the exhibition before they actually saw the exhibition. In rural Austria, the local hunters came and blew their hunting horns and then occupied the Glutton, consuming all of the alcohol and eating all of the sausages that were part of the installation. And we really could not get them out of there. So I mean, one of the aspects of, and in making these works around hunting, I'm always trying to walk a tightrope in which someone who is adamantly against hunting can see the exhibition as a representation of their perspective, but someone who's a hunter could also come and feel that their position was fairly treated. So, but you know, what I'm interested in is what makes me uncomfortable, of course, is any association with pleasure and killing, right? And so I've always wanted to articulate that in the end, what defines hunting is a sort of brutality of endowment.
The wallpaper is designed by Mark, and every creature that you see in it is now extinct. This is a space also where we might think about museums, museology, with this amazing series of polar bears and the whole 19th century legacy of taxidermy. Why did you choose the polar bear?
Well, you know, the polar bear is such an animal that is synonymous with the Arctic itself, right? And our attitudes toward the polar bear really represent our changing attitude from the Arctic. You know, in the 19th century, we see the polar bear as this incredibly ferocious, fierce, wild thing that we need to be protected from. And of course, now we often represent the polar bear as this cuddly, family-oriented, wonderful, soft thing from the Arctic, which we don't need to be protected from, but we need to protect. So that's, you know, really kind of, I think, dramatically borne out if you look at this. You know, it's more than 100 and something years of representations of polar bears, from taxonomic to habitat group to education prop to specimen and biogeographical presentation. So each place is representing those bears in different ways, and also you do certainly see the evolution of taxidermy within this, from bears that are literally just stuffed to bears that are sculpted into fantastical positions, whether they're ferocious or cuddly. I was invited to come to Manchester University to work with their Department of Art History. They had there was a group of art historians who had made an application to set up a center for the study of surrealism and its legacy, and much to their surprise, they were actually funded at the highest level. And in the project we did in Manchester, we were able to work with the Manchester Museum, which of course is this marvelous museum of natural history, ethnography, numismatics, archery. You know, it's just this kind of incredible old universal Victorian museum, which has updated itself, but there are many objects behind the scenes that no longer fit the mandate of the museum. These kind of orphaned orphaned objects. So I wanted to recreate what I imagine a Bureau of Surrealism might look like, and to use these objects that are now marooned at the Manchester Museum. They don't fit their education purposes. They are not scientific because the data has been lost. They're fragmented, broken. They might be fakes and forgeries. Whatever these categories are, they're very much like the categories of things that the Surrealists were interested in. And so this is the Bureau of the Center of the Study of Surrealism and its legacy.
I suppose the other interesting reference back to surrealism is the juxtaposition of objects, putting one unlikely thing next to another.
Right.
So instead of that kind of broad classifications that science imposes of like with like, that everything here, nothing relates to what's next to it really. And that's the beauty of it and the poetry. It's almost like if you read any one surface in a straight line and put that into words, it's immediately a poem. And I think that's what's so delightful and unexpected about it, is seeing individual passages within this room. It had been a massive power station decommissioned in 1962, and it was this weird lacunae, this black spot in the middle of London that no one really knew about. So as curators, we were invited to think about how to not only warn the local community about this bloody great thing that was about to land on them, this beer moth, to actually start working with local communities and preparing them for what was to happen, but at the same time to introduce the international art world to a part of London that no one had ever heard of. So I immediately picked up the phone to Mark and asked if he would come and work with us and make a project.
Interesting phenomenon that we would have two takes for this period. We had, one at Bankside and one at Millbank. And so connected by the Thames as everything in London is. So we assembled a team of volunteers who were either under 17 or over 65. Many of them are depicted there behind you. And we decided we would do an archaeological endeavor looking at the foreshore. The foreshore is visible about for two sections of about 4.5 hours each during the day. So we would dig on surface finds. Each day we would identify an area and we would all go out there and collect. They were instructed to collect every human-made thing we encountered. We had this massive amount of material on both sides. The second stage was we built these tents on the lawn of the Tate, and then every single object, every bit of broken glass, every nail, every cell phone, every message in a bottle, every plastic bottle cap was cleaned and cataloged from that. And then finally this vast double-sided cabinet was built to contain all of the objects.
This is one of my favourite drawers here. And it's shoe soles. And even these, aren't they beautiful? They're like small works of art, each one. And they're slightly crystalline, they're layered. They speak of different fashions, different trends, different foot sizes, even how big we've grown over the last couple of centuries. And I think each one of these shows how every piece of material culture, despite the fact that it's mostly, we think of it as garbage, repays this kind of observation and care. Now to the final space in our exhibition, and this comes actually all the way from Venice, and it's one of a series of spaces that Mark created in a palazzo in Venice, and it really looked at process and the way that we as a culture have retrieved materials, observed them, drawn them, and then made them in a kind of metamorphosis into material culture themselves. It's this idea of bringing objects into a room and then creating new relationships between them and between the viewer and the object. And one of the great marvels, perhaps, of curating is that sense of wonder that this convention of the white cube can still convey. And I think that this work, even though it looks at creatures which are so abstracted from their origins, or objects which are now completely obsolete, they've made a transition from the real world into the world of abstraction. And for me, in terms of the journey of the exhibition, it's also a journey from life, from the living zebra finches downstairs to the ghosts of the natural world.
You know, one of the things I really want to do with this exhibition in general is to slow viewers down, right? I've witnessed a lot of people in museums across the world running through exhibitions like they're running through an IKEA trying to find the checkout point, you know. So I want to try, and I devised in the exhibition a number of situations to arrest the viewer a little bit, to try to make them spend a little more time, to look more carefully. And the work has a material complexity that rewards careful viewers. You know, the more you put into these works, the more carefully you look at them, the more you will see. In the same way, you know, if you look at you know, Dutch still life, the more time you spend with the work, the more you're likely to be able to uncode what's actually going on in it. So I want this work, I want its material complexity, which has taken a lot of energy to find and to gather and to put together, to arrest the viewer, to make them careful viewers, and to reward that careful viewer. The works are mirrors to that. They give back the attention that is put into them.